Hi everyone, it's Paul Kagabine from the Garland County Library, and tonight we have our first ever virtual version of the Master Gardener's Know It to Grow It program. If you're not familiar with that series, it was one of our most popular and regular in-person events back in the days before COVID, and they would present a different topic about gardening pretty much every month. They would sometimes fill our auditorium with like 80 to 100 people at some of those events, which hopefully we'll have that many tonight, and we can fit more people in the virtual audience than we could ever fit in the auditorium. So maybe we'll reach even more people tonight with this. Well, originally they had a huge schedule planned out for 2020, but as you know, things happen. But here we are, and the library is glad to have this particular series back in action, and we're glad to be partnering again with the Master Gardeners. This first event the Master Gardeners planned for us, which you're about to watch, is all about fall. And the guest speaker tonight is Minnie Shelor, who is the Garvan Woodland Gardens garden manager. That's kind of a tongue twister. Welcome, Minnie.
Hi. Glad for you.
Absolutely. How are you, and how are things over at Garvan Gardens right now?
Oh, everything's going really well. We're gearing up for our modified winter fest right now, and just getting kind of the feel of things and staying busy.
Absolutely. What's the light situation like this year?
So what we did with the COVID situation and our inability to really control the number of people that are coming into the gardens, we went ahead and went with a daytime show. So we're not going to have lights per se. So what we do have are about 4 selfie areas. We've got the front arbor that will be decorated, the pavilion that will be decorated like a snow globe. James the Train will be out. We'll have a small crystal winter garden, and then Jack's Bench is back by popular demand, the bow behind Jack's Bench.
All right. Well, so Minnie has prepared a presentation for everyone this evening. Again, all about fall, everything you need to know about gardening in the fall. And if anyone in the viewing audience has any comments or questions for Minnie, please let me know. Post them there in the comment feed, and I'll read them off to her after her presentation portion is over. So I'm going to get your slideshow up there on the screen, and then I'll let you take over, and I'll see you on the other side.
All right, thank you. Okay, so all about fall. We're going to be looking at a series of different aspects of our fall gardening and our fall atmosphere that we have out in nature in our gardens. So again, I'm Minnie Shelor, garden manager. I do a lot of the design work as well for Garvan Woodland Gardens. I've been there about 6 years now. So we're going to start out with some basics, and I'm calling this your fall into good habits. So one of the foundational pieces about fall gardening is that you're setting yourself up for success in the next spring. So if you get into those good habits in the fall, which at home, I have to admit, I lack on until it gets a little bit cooler outside and the ants go dormant. But what we look at are the clean it, test it, amend it, prune it, and plant it. So we're going to get into each one of these in a little bit more detail. The first part that we're going to look at is cleaning our garden beds out. And the number one thing that we struggle with in fall are those pesky leaves from all of our deciduous trees. And believe it or not, those guys are fantastic nutrient sources for our garden spaces. And there is the idea of you can do one of two things with your leaves to really reuse them. You can either use them as a mulch or you can use them as compost. One of my home gardening recommendations is to use it as mulch. If you just take your mower out and run a couple of times over the leaves, mulch them up nice and fine, throw them over the top of your flower beds, it's going to do a dual purpose where it's going to reintroduce those nutrients that have fallen from those tree leaves, lots of nitrogen back into the soil, as well as help to really keep down those winter weeds. The other thing that you can do with those is just to go ahead and throw them in your compost pile. It's going to add that brown material back as you're pulling out the greens. It's going to add that browns back and really keep your compost balanced. One thing that you do want to use caution with is that if you do have any trees or shrubs that have had any disease issues, you don't necessarily want to compost that without making sure that your compost gets hot enough to kill those pathogens. So keep that in mind as you're making that decision, whether you want to mulch it back in or compost it. The next part of cleaning is to go ahead and trim back any of your plants that have started to go dormant. So that would include any of your perennials, any of those shrubs. Gives you this ideal time as they go dormant to see the structure of them. I'm going to get into pruning a little bit more here in just a moment. So I'm going to mainly focus on our perennial and herbaceous plants. So you want to remove and dispose of anything, obviously, that has had diseases or insect issues. You don't want to reintroduce those insect or eggs or that disease without composting it in some way or treating it in some way. The best advice that I can give you is that if you do have something that you know has been diseased, to just go ahead and burn that and dispose of it in that manner, not put it back in your compost pile. You really don't want to risk reintroducing those pathogens. As you're cutting back, you want to make sure that your plants have gone dormant. You do run the risk, the same with pruning, as you do with cutting these back, that if you cut them back too early, can cause a flush of new growth that's nice and tender. And the first frost or freeze that we have can actually do some winter damage and affect the longevity and affect the look of that plant later on. The other thing, once your beds are cleaned out and you've exposed that soil, that you can do is to go ahead and have a soil test done and then make your amendments. Go ahead and add those amendments in if you want to adjust your soil pH, if you need to add some non-nitrogen type elements that are not as water soluble back to the soil. This is a perfect time to do it. The reason is you can really work that soil away from the root matter of your existing plants and then get those compounds down into the soil that aren't water soluble. Great way to take advantage of University of Arkansas's Cooperative Extension Services is through their free soil testing. So this is free for residents. There's instructions on their website. I put a handy dandy little URL down at the bottom so that you can go right to that web page. Got a great video. They show you how to take the soil samples. And there's also some helpful information on there of how to read those sample results once you get them back. Do keep in mind that because of the type of testing that's done with soil testing, it's not instantaneous. So if you are planning on getting your soil tested and adding anything to your soil to amend it, it's going to be a couple of weeks before you get those results back. So plan accordingly. And prune or not to prune on your shrubs. So pruning in the winter is a fantastic thing. Pruning in the fall can be dangerous. Part of the reason for that is that we do get these flushes where plants, especially like hydrangeas, will start to lose their leaves, look like they're going dormant. Go ahead and take the nippers and start to cut pieces off. And then, oh my gosh, at the bottom, they flush out with new growth, which is then damaged by the cold of the winter. So do watch out. I'm hovering the cursor over this little spot where some perennials were cut back a little bit prematurely. And now we have this flush of new growth. And so again, what that can do, what that has the potential to do, is to cause winter damage and winter stress on those plants. The other issue with pruning too early is that it's going to suck more water up into the plant. So it's not just the leaf matter that's getting damaged. It can also damage the stems because of the fact that that liquid, that water, is being brought up into the stems, and that can be in fluid. So next is to get planting. The things that we typically think of planting in the fall, of course, are our turf grasses and our veggies. It's also a great time for bulb shrubs and trees. So I'm not going to focus on the turf and the veggies in this presentation. I'm going to focus on those ornamentals of the bulbs, the shrubs, and the trees. And real quickly, we're going to go over some fun facts about bulbs and some basics. As many of you know, we have a pretty spectacular large bulb show at Garvan Woodland Gardens. We'd love to see you come out in the early spring and go through the gamut of different bulbs that we have throughout the season. One of the key questions that I frequently get asked is, which bulbs do I need to chill and which bulbs are okay to just plant? So those fall planted bulbs, tulips, hyacinths, daffodils, crocus, and muscari, snowdrops, those actually do need a chilling period. Now, I know that we have daffodils that perennialize. I know that it's not necessary for them to have the same amount of chilling time. But the difference is that when you do get pre-chilled daffodils or chill them before you plant them, you're going to have a higher yield of large blossoms, and you're going to have more blossoms that you're going to see on those daffodils. Yes, they perennialize. Yes, they do come back easily, unlike those tulips and hyacinths, but they still benefit from that chilling moment. So tulips and hyacinths are a must if they're floral hyacinths, and those tulips when you are zone 7B, which is what we are, and then further south. The amaryllis, paper whites, ranunculus, anemones, and allium, however, those don't need to be chilled. You can plant them in either the fall or the spring. Oftentimes fall planting is recommended because it does allow them to grow in, set up a root structure before the actual leaves are put on. So if you're perennializing these, it's better to plant them in the fall. They're going to have a stronger root system. When you get your bulbs ordered, you're going to want to look for those healthy bulbs. And so what I have for you in the crate that's marked Temple of Beauty on the left-hand side are a crate of healthy bulbs. And on the right-hand side are some signs that you look for that something's gone a little bit amiss with the chilling or with the shipping on the bulbs. So in this, you can see that there is a green cast to many of these bulbs. There's actually some rot. And then these bulbs have already started to sprout. So that tells me two things. The sprout tells me that these bulbs have not been kept at a cold enough temperature. If they're kept at that key temperature that we'll go into in just a moment, it's going to keep them from actually having any of that green growth on it. Root growth is desirable once they're in the ground. That sprout growth isn't desirable until after they're in the ground. If they do have sprouts, you still plant them. They will still come up. It just means that some of that energy has already been expended in that first flush of sprouts. So do keep that in mind. If you have some bulbs that you've left at the back of a closet or that have been forgotten in the fridge, don't despair. What you're going to look for on those bulbs, and I've got an example here. If you want to switch over so that we can zoom in on this guy. So we've got, here is a spider lily. I actually pulled this guy up last fall, and he got tucked back into a pile of leaves, and he is still healthy. And I've got a couple of his little brothers here as well. So not only does the green shoot tell me that he's healthy, but the fact that the bulb is still firm, and the cluster that I found was actually growing into the pile of leaves. They had root structures that had already started. Okay, we can go back to the PowerPoint now. So, how to chill your bulbs. We look for a total length of time for tulips of 12 to 16 weeks. The tulip experts tell me that you cannot over chill your tulip bulbs. 16 weeks is really ideal for a lot of the large flowering varieties, as it gives them time to really develop that embryonic flower. The ideal temperature to pre-chill your bulbs is from 35 to 40 degrees. You can nudge it up a little bit higher to about 45, but I wouldn't recommend going past that because that's where you start to see those little sprouts coming on. Don't chill with fruits or veggies, because what happens is that they release, as they start to decay and age, ethylene gas. It's completely harmless to us. We can't taste it, we can't smell it, but what it does is it can destroy the flower bud. The ethylene gas can also cause bud loss in the flowers, which is why when you get anything from the florist, they're always very careful to ship those flowers separate from any fruits or veggies, even though they have to be refrigerated. You want to plant your tulips, or your bulbs, I should say, when the soil temperature maintains about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So those are the bulbs that require pre-chilling. You can plant the other bulbs a little bit earlier, but do be aware if you plant them too early, what you're going to see is growth of the green shoots before the soil temperatures have adequately dropped. You don't want the shoots to grow, you only want the roots to grow. So that temperature of 55 degrees keeps the shoot dormant, but allows the root growth to occur. So that bulb has that healthy root system that's going to develop over time as it grows in the ground. And then you plant away. So when you're planting bulbs, we have a general rule of thumb that you're going to plant the depth 3 times the height of the bulb. So tulip bulbs, about 6 inches deep, because the bulbs tend to be around 2 inches high. You'll dig a hole, the depth, push the bulb all the way down to the bottom, make sure that it's right side up, and then wait for it to go ahead and grow on. One of the coolest things that I think you can do with bulbs are to do what's called bulb lasagna. So if you look to the right-hand side, you can see a picture that I pulled off of one of the bulb vendors' websites. This is an example of bulb lasagna. And what you do with these is you layer the bulbs into either a pot or a planting bed. So you plant the largest bulbs at the bottom and then layer on top of those the smaller bulbs until you get all the way to the top. So typically, if you're going to plant daffodils, which are an early bloomer, the hyacinths and the tulips together, you would layer those, daffodils on the bottom, followed by tulips with hyacinth on the top, just according to those bulb sizes. And then as they grow on, you're going to see that they transition through the floral display. This pot has obviously been forced because they're all growing at the same time. We don't typically have floral hyacinths and the tulips growing at the same time unless they're extremely early tulips. Do keep that in mind as well. There are several great resources out there if you do decide to do a mixed bulb planting to allow you to select bulbs that flower at similar times. So keep that in mind. Another question I'm frequently asked is, should I fertilize my bulbs when I plant them? Well, your bulbs are self-inclusive. So your bulbs have everything that they need in order to flower already packed inside all those nutrients that are stored up in that bulb. So the handy dandy thing is that you don't need to fertilize them when you plant them. But what you do want to look for is those that are not going to be treated as annuals, like your daffodils. You want to look for that little bit of green to sprout and then go ahead and spread some fertilizer down at that point. At the garden, we like to use a blend of cottonseed meal and bone meal and spread that over the tops of those and just lightly work it into the soil. We don't want to damage those green spears that have already started to come up, so we do have to do that very delicately. What that does is gives us time for that organic fertilizer to start to break down and work its way down into the soil. So nitrogen is highly water soluble. It's going to work its way down in the soil pretty quickly, but a lot of those other nutrients aren't, and it does take a little bit longer for them to work their way through those layers of soil. So when you fertilize depends on if you're going to treat them as annuals or if you're going to treat them as perennials. Of course, since we dig all of our tulip bulbs up, we aren't going to treat them with any kind of a fertilizer. It would be a waste of our time and it would be a waste of our money. So we go ahead and plant them and then let them go. The way that we do our design work at Garvan is pretty extensive. So I put together the tulip designs through a computer program, and I use a drafting, an AutoCAD or another CAD-based drafting program to put together bed lines, figure out square footages. From those square footages, I assign a number of bulbs, and then we go through and we hand plant them. So everything that you see that's planted at our garden is actually hand dug. And the way that we do this is by laying out these nice white lines on the ground according to the plan that I've drawn up. And then we dig our bulbs into the ground on a spacing depending on the variety of between 5 and 6 inches apart and 6 inches deep. So as a homeowner, I wanted to plant my own bulbs. And so I went ahead and got this nice handy dandy bulb planter from Lowe's. You can absolutely buy one of these handy dandy bulb planters, but what I would recommend is don't buy a type like I did, where it has a point on it like this. You want to buy one that's a spade. So this point doesn't allow me to plant tulip bulbs. That is not the size of a tulip bulb. That's about the size of a crocus. So not working so well for my tulip bulbs. I still had to go back through and finish digging out the hole with the trowel. Lesson learned, won't do it again. We do have industrial strength bulb planters that we've actually fabricated at the gardens. because why not? And those are actually modeled over what the Forestry Service uses to do some tree planting. In Arkansas, we tend to have some really rocky soils unless you're in the river flats. So it's good to have a tool like that. Trowels usually don't get the job done. So use those tools, keep yourself healthy, and don't hurt yourself while you're doing it. Partners are great for planting bulbs, especially if you have a bulb bar. One person can actually dig the hole, the other person can come along behind and plant in that hole. That's how we do that at the gardens. We typically create teams of 2, have one person planting, have one person digging those holes in advance. And you try to work fast and not get hit in the head with the tulip bar. So the finished product is going to look something like this. Whenever I do my design work, I really try to consider the timing of the tulips so that I have as much bloom as possible in a space at a time. And it's kind of an art and a science where you go through and figure out what colors you want in that space for that contrast, the height, the shape, and the timing of the blooms. As well as another aspect I've started to introduce are fragrant tulips. I've really tried to focus on that and make sure that we have at least one fragrant variety of tulips in each of the spaces. So as you walk through, you're really able to indulge all of your senses, except of course in this case, taste and touch, because we really don't want you eating the tulip bulbs or picking them. Let them remain for all to enjoy. So fall color is our last little bit that I'm going to talk about. As we can see this year, we're getting some great color going on, and I'm sure that a lot of you are noticing those trees and shrubs that are coloring up and saying, wow, I'd really like to have that for my backyard. So along with the planting aspect of those, shopping happens right now. So if you're really enticed by those fall colors, go to your nursery, look for that specific tree and shrub that is currently in color. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is you can have a lot of color variation. So let's say we have a sugar maple. You can have a variety of different ranges from yellows to oranges to almost a pink color with those sugar maples. And it's going to be dependent on the genetics of that specific plant. So even when you go with a cultivar, there still is a range within that of those colors. So it is important that if you are selecting a plant for fall color, that you buy it in the fall and absolutely plant it in the fall. Fall is a great time to plant those trees and shrubs. Just remember, especially with those deciduous trees and shrubs that you're planting in the fall, you're going to have to water them throughout the winter time. They are dormant, but they're not dead. They are still going through transpiration through little pores that are on their bark and sucking up the water from the soil. So they do need water. And it is frequent that we have plants that will perish during the winter time because they're not watered enough. So to keep an eye on that. Arkansas does get quite a bit of winter rain. So there is a possibility. If you're not careful and you've had 5 inches of rain in 2 weeks, and then you keep watering, to overwater those as well. So just use a little bit of balancing act with that and keep in mind the needs of that tree and shrub. We're also going to cover very quickly what makes the colors change and how those colors are hidden and why we see that color come out during the fall. So of course, the colors that we see most frequently are those red, oranges, yellows, and purples. There are a lot of shrubs and trees that also go through sort of this dull brown stage. And some of them will even not really go through a true fall color change. The leaves just fall off. So a lot of the hickories and a lot of the oaks go through that, where they have a very mild color change, which is why in Arkansas, we don't necessarily have in this area in the Ouachita Mountains the most dramatic fall color. We don't have a lot of these other species like maples that you're going to see this dramatic color change in. So do keep that in mind, that those areas that have the maples are going to have the greatest variety of color. Although we do have a few gems that we can look for. The dogwoods have that nice red color, and so do black gum. Black gums are really early, and those leaves fall off quite quickly. And of course, the dreaded Bradford pear. That is an invasive. Fall is the #1 time to identify that bad boy because it's got that brilliant red color. If you're looking for some oranges, one of the most spectacular colors of oranges that I've seen are on crepe myrtles. So again, shop for those in the nursery this time of year. And of course, Japanese maples. Japanese maples have a great selection of reds, oranges, yellows, and even some that have that purple tinge to it. I took a few images of interesting trees that were in some pretty vibrant colors at the gardens. And so I want to take you on a little walk through the gardens with me. So we've got witch hazel that not only has this brilliant fall color, but it also puts on a flower this time of year, which is fantastic. Our Japanese maples right now are just starting to color up. Don't worry, you haven't missed it. In the next week or two, they're going to be spectacular. Please, if you have the time, go ahead and take a trip to the garden and walk through the Garden of Pine Wind. It's totally worth it right now. Quite a few mulberry that are growing. Mulberry are a little bit of a trash tree, but they are spectacular with this chartreuse. It's really standing out this year. And of course, dogwoods color up. They range anywhere from sort of this pinkish red all the way up to a deep, almost red purple. Ginkgo biloba are another tree that has spectacular yellow color in the fall. This one is just starting to color up, so it's not quite hit its peak yet, but they look like they are glowing with sunfire. Bottlebrush Buckeye is one that grows in our region quite readily. Beautiful shrub, and it has this lovely fall color on it. It does have a very thick texture in the wintertime, so it does look a little bit blocky and doesn't do a lot for screening. And then, of course, our oaks. So the oaks still have that reddish orange cast to them. They don't necessarily look as spectacular every year, but this year they're putting on a lot of color. And again, that's because we've had these ideal days leading up to it. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail on what those environmental conditions are here in just a moment. Hickory is usually disappointing and sad. Typically, hickories get this orangish rush color. They just look like the leaves curl up and die on those hickory trees. But why do the trees lose their leaves at all? So this is one of those questions that the scientist in me just couldn't resist. So the reason that trees have evolved to lose their leaves is to protect themselves from those harsh winter climate, as well as to reclaim nutrients. At the center of the chlorophyll molecule is actually magnesium, which is not very water soluble, and it's also not readily available in the environment. So as a tree invests its energy into claiming that magnesium from the soil, it doesn't want to let it go. So it reclaims that chlorophyll, and a lot of those chlorophyll molecules are broken down at a molecular level by sunlight during the fall season and then reabsorbed into the tree. Another reason is to help protect that tree. If that tree were to keep its leaves on, well, we've all seen what happens with an early freeze in the spring. It has all these dead appendages that it's spent all this time and energy creating that are now wasted, and it has to go back through all of that energy to recreate those later on. Reduces winter water loss as well. If you notice, a lot of the trees that are left with leaves on them have either little tiny leaves or needle leaves during the winter months, and that actually is because they've evolved to reduce the water loss through those tiny leaves and through those needle-like leaves that have a waxy coating on them. It helps to prevent that water loss. Most of the deciduous trees are going to have a really thin, flimsy leaf with a lot of stomata openings on the underside that aid in transpiration and cause water loss. So those hidden jewels that we have inside the tree leaves that come out during the fall, are those colors there all year? Well, some of them are. So we have two major pigments besides the green of the chlorophyll that are the xanthophylls and the carotenoids, that are the yellows and oranges. And they're there all the time. And they actually help to process all of those chemicals and make food for the trees themselves. So there's a quick little experiment that I I used to do when I taught school that you can do at home. This is the at-home version without the complicated chromatography paper and all of those other pieces and parts. And so I'm going to show you real quickly how to do that. So if you want to switch me over so I'm on the big screen. Okay. I'm going to start with some leaves, of course. Scissors. Filter paper. I like to use a handy dandy smoothie maker. You have a food processor. If you are really old school and have a mortar and pestle, that works really well to squish the leaves and release the pigment. And then we're just going to use some alcohol, rubbing alcohol. And so what I do is I cut the leaf into little pieces, drop it in the blender, blend it until it looks like this. Nice soupy mush. I'm going to pour alcohol on top of that leaf in the blender. I skipped that step to just cover the leaf. That's important because otherwise you would just end up with smushed leaf. So pour a little bit of alcohol on that to give it this nice leaf smoothie look. You're going to cover that with some plastic wrap. Set this in a warm water bath for about 30 minutes. Once you had it set in the warm water bath, what you're going to see is this nice green liquid with all of our plant pigments that are in there. Cut your filter paper into 1-inch strips. Wind it around a pencil. Dip it in so the top is just barely touching the top. And then set it aside for a couple hours. And what you get are these nice pigments that have separated out. All right, there's some science fun for you. So what is it that makes the fall colors so great? And why is this year supposed to be such a spectacular year? Well, one of the reasons is that we haven't had a freeze yet. So if we get a freeze, it causes the abscisic acid in those leaves to speed up the process. And so the stem from the leaf actually separates from that node very quickly. If you notice, we have some trees like post oaks that will keep their leaves all the way through until the summer months. That's just due to those vascular structures that are inside the leaf. It actually takes the force in the new bud opening to push that leaf loose. It is still dormant. A strong wind will knock that leaf off. The other thing that helps is a rainy growing season. This year we had a lot of rain throughout the spring and also through the summer and even late into September. Our cool, dry nights have helped, as well as the warm, sunny days. So fingers crossed, no heavy rains, no strong winds. We should see a pretty spectacular fall this year and really be able to take in the sights and sounds of the Ouachita Mountains in the fall. All right, and that concludes what I have today. Any questions?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. All right, well, that was a very well put together PowerPoint, and I gotta say, I didn't expect to hear the word lasagna so many times. Made me pretty hungry. But we did get a few questions submitted different ways. But first of all, I want to say anyone watching live, this video is going to be uploaded onto the library's Facebook account in the video tab, so you can go back and refer to it at any point if you want to hear some information again, or you're just tuned in the middle, or you just want to share with a friend. And it'll also be on the library's YouTube page. So for all of eternity, Minnie, your information's out there. All right, so first of all, we got a question from Michael and Teresa. I have always sprinkled my poppy seeds in the fall and they sprout in the spring. This is a trick my dad taught me. This year I sprinkled them and they have already sprouted. How can I keep them from continuing their growth spurt? Well,
unfortunately with the poppy seeds, that's probably going to be it for them. We are still expecting more temperatures in the 70s, and so there isn't anything to do to really stall those out at the moment. Once they've started sprouting, best thing to do is just to keep them moist, and if you put some mulch over them, hopefully it'll help contain that warmth around them so that they make it through the winter months.
All right, and just got a comment from Paula who says, thanks, Minnie. Anyone else watching live, feel free to submit comments or questions. There's also some questions I received in advance via email, so we'll go over those. First of all, how many bulbs do you plant at the gardens?
So as far as tulips go, we plant around 145,000 tulips, and our number this year is around 220,000 bulbs total that we're doing. So that's pretty typical for us. Tulips are the big show, but we also plant daffodils and some crocus, some hyacinths, those type of things as well, allium.
When's the best time to order bulbs?
The best time to order bulbs, they typically start digging those bulbs in August. So August is really the best time to get your pre-order in. Some sites will open up early ordering in July. The earlier you can order them, the better selection and better variety that you're going to get. They sell out as they dig them. So that's one thing that I found. Order them as early as you're able.
Do you recommend mulching in the fall?
I would say it depends on the bed. I do for weed control. So I think that mulching in fall helps to keep down those winter weeds and leaves you less struggle when you're opening the beds back up in the spring. It's easier to put your pre-emergent down and really take care of those weeds in advance.
If you want to plant a vegetable bed again in the spring, how do you keep the winter weeds down?
So there are a couple ways that you can do that. So if you're growing vegetables, we do have some people who've used brown paper bags, which aren't as popular anymore since we've all gone to the carry bags. Newspaper works if you are wanting sort of that just physical barrier, newspaper and some mulch over it, or a cover crop. You can find a variety of different cover crops that do different things depending on if you want nitrogen enrichment or if you're really looking just to have something to fight the weeds back. So there are a few different places that you can look. The annual rye is a really good one to plant and then just till in. Make sure if you do plant a cover crop though that you till it in before it goes to seed, because otherwise you might have a problem.
When's the best time to plant perennials?
So perennials can be planted in the fall or in the spring. It really depends on the size of perennial that you're planting. If you're getting a small pot smaller than a 1 gallon, I would recommend waiting until the spring to plant it so that it has time to really grow on into your garden. But if you have a larger perennial pot that you're planting, the fall is a perfect time to plant it.
And then when's the best time to visit the garden to see tulips?
So typically it's going to be a window from March until April. The best thing to do if you're wanting to visit the gardens to look for tulips is to pay attention to our Facebook page. We have a marketing manager who goes out and takes pictures every day so that you can see what percentage bloom that we're in. We have had a couple years, the past few years that have been pretty spectacular, where we've gotten up to about 80% of the tulips all in bloom at one time, just due to the weather cooperating. That doesn't happen every year. So early tulips, if we get hit by a lot of rain, anything like that, they'll fade. We frequently have people who will come early March and then come once a week all the way through April so that they're able to see all of the different tulips in bloom at the different times.
In your presentation, you talked a lot about the beautiful fall leaves. Other than, of course, the gardens, are there any particular areas that you would recommend for a hike or a drive in Arkansas this time of year?
Yeah, so there are a couple of places that I've been. Now, of course, the Scenic 7. If you go up Highway 7, there's some really spectacular views and overlooks that are pull-offs off to the side. On the way up to Fayetteville is the Boston Loop. That's pretty spectacular as well. And then, of course, everyone flocks to Petty Jean during the fall.
Just got a question from Susan. I've noticed a black discoloration on several trees around my neighborhood. Is there a common fungus or disease that visits our area this time of year?
So typically we start to see some spotting similar to what I've got on this oak here. And that's not necessarily a disease. That's just the decline of the leaf as it's pulling those nutrients back. So if that's what you're seeing, it's typically not a disease. It's just the life cycle of the leaf as those nutrients are pulled back.
On that topic, are there any other issues that come up a lot this year that you didn't already mention, or this time of year?
I can't think of any besides, like an early freeze that might be, detrimental to your plant. So if we do have an early freeze and you notice damage from that early freeze, you do want to go ahead and cut that plant back past the damaged portion.
All right. Last chance for questions or comments from the audience. While we're waiting on that, what are the plans for the gardens in 2021?
So we really have been trying to take advantage of this fact that we're an outdoor space and that we're one of the few venues that you can still visit mask-free. So it's we're really just planning on rolling forward with our slow weekends or I shouldn't say slow weekends, but with our spreading our celebration weekends out over the months versus trying to condense everything down. Our Winter Fest that we're having this year is as I described in the beginning, going to be a different vignette. It's not going to be a night show. It's going to be a daytime show. And we are at a point right now where we've completed some pretty major construction projects, and the rest of the projects that we have are going to be infrastructure that won't dramatically impact the visitor experience. We've had quite extensive trail installation that's gone on all the way from the pavilion to Perry Wildflower Overlook. It's over a quarter mile of concrete trail that we put in so that it increases our ADA accessibility, and those people who rely on transportation to get to and from, they're not killing their batteries getting all the way down there.
Excellent. All right. Well, that was very informative. And anybody watching live, if you have any suggestions for the Know It to Grow It program for the Master Gardeners, you can submit them here or go to the Master Gardeners Facebook page. I'm sure they'd love suggestions. We're planning a big calendar, collaborating with the library and the Master Gardeners for 2021, all kinds of virtual programs. We already have the next one announced, which is December 12th. That's a Saturday at 6 p.m. That's going to feature Jerry Butler, who's with the Garland County Audubon Society. He's going to be talking about the Christmas bird count. And he'll also go over some bird watching tips in general. So anyone interested in that might enjoy it. And Minnie, I'll let you have a moment. If you have any final words or other tips you'd like to share, take your time. Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, just thank you all for tuning in and for the opportunity to share your evening with me. Thanks.
Absolutely. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in. And Minnie, thank you for this presentation. Have a good night.
Yeah. Thank you. Good night.